So I just listened to this interview from somebody named Daryl Davis, who is a black man that over the course of several decades has managed to convince 200 Ku Klux Klan members to leave the Klan. And so I listened to that interview, and I thought it had a lot of useful tidbits in terms of how he went about having a conversation with people with reprehensible ideologies, and then a productive conversation, something that's pretty rare today, and how that method compared to what is the dominant mode of discourse in the public sphere, at least as portrayed through the media and increasingly on social media and in liberal circles, to be frank. And so what Daryl did is, well, first of all, he experienced a lot of racism as a child, as have most black people, especially growing up in the 60s and 70s. And he didn't understand it, and he wanted to understand how somebody could hate him without even knowing who he was. And so in pursuit of that aim, as an adult, when he happened across a bar that the KKK members frequented in Virginia, he, asked around, got the information for the leaders of the organization, the Imperial Wizard and the Exalted Cyclops and the Grand Dragon, the funny named magic people, the magic racists. And he, asked to have interviews with them, and, long story short, he sat down with them, he listened to their points of view, their extremely bigoted, prejudiced, ill-informed points of view, and rather than responding with the type of response which would have been understandable given the circumstance and how terrible the things they were saying about him were, which would be to, for him to dismiss them as racist, say that they're, bigots, they don't belong in polite society, they should be shunned, the world would be better off without them, start shouting maybe, which is something that we see online quite a bit for people that are objectively less racist than the Ku Klux Klan. Like, you can have your opinions about Trump supporters, but they are not KKK members, or actually a lot of them are KKK. A lot of KKK members are Trump supporters, but there's only a few thousand people in the KKK, and there's 63 million Trump supporters. And so by and large, they are not that racist at all. And so responding to them with, shut up racist is, makes less sense than for him to do it with an actual KKK member, and it's less justified since most of the time that's happening from Twitter warriors, on college campuses without much direct experience with that type of racism, and they're doing it to people who are less racist. And so in the extreme environment of the most extreme circumstance of racism, he responded with trying to hear what they had to say, and then dismissing or rebutting the points that he thought didn't make any sense, in terms of when they would say, make arguments about, black people being criminals and more violent, rather than saying you're a racist, because what they said was racist, he would say, okay, well, here are the reasons why there are more black people in prisons. It's because of discrepancies in drug sentencing laws, crack cocaine being 100 times long of a sentence as regular cocaine, because crack is what black people use traditionally, and white cocaine was for wealthy white partygoers. And so that causes discrepancy over policing, the drug war in general, legacies of slavery, of Jim Crow, of segregation, of banking discrimination, leading to black wealth being 1/10 of white wealth, even today, which is the same level as 1968. And so that creating poverty, and poverty, universally creating more violence and distress and lack of opportunities, which leads to the crime rates going up. And so he would respond with actual responses to the arguments that they were making, rather than ad hominems and total dismissals of those arguments. And so I listened to that, and I compared it in my head, and now out loud, to the forest and the internet, with some of the recent reactions to quote-unquote racist behavior, which liberal America has made a point of doing over the last several weeks. And so a couple of quick examples. So there's a UCLA professor right now that is under investigation after a faculty and student backlash because they read Martin Luther King's letter from a Birmingham jail. And within that letter somewhere there's the N-word. And And so that was just unacceptable. And this is a type of racist that we need to deplatform and maybe fire, because we can't have them espousing those type of views in our institution. This is the same type of idea that would say that we can't read Mark Twain anymore because the N-word is all over Huckleberry Finn and Tom Sawyer's lips, and so that's just not okay in today's America. And that destroys nuance, it destroys context, and it also kind of destroys what the legacy, how racist the legacy of America was, and it conflates people that are actually just repeating history, important parts of history, with the racists themselves, which they are objectively reporting on or quoting. And so that's not very helpful. But to people that want to feel good about themselves and want to take the quick and easy step of getting lots of likes and getting retweets and sitting on the high horse, the high horse of intellectually woke non-racist, condemning the bigoted actions of others without trying to understand any context surrounding what they're saying, or if there's any value in what could be said. That's just not important. And so that guy needs to go. There was a data scientist that was just fired because he tweeted out a study on the 1968 elections, which showed that after the riots of 1968, after MLK was assassinated on April 4th, the Democrats lost about 2% in the surrounding suburbs, in the areas that had violent protests or had riots, and that ended up leading to the election of Richard Nixon, which had pretty bad consequences for black people, as he started to popularize the war on drugs in the mainstream, even though it had started before that, but he escalated under him, as well as the world generally. Disproportionately brown and people of color, because that's where Vietnam was, and Laos was, and Cambodia was, and they're also brown in Chile and Central America and the many other places that he bombed, assassinated, plotted coups in. And so, just the analysis that, hey, whether or not rioting is legitimate or not, it led to, these outcomes because this person was elected, in this case Nixon, rather than others, so maybe it's not the best strategic thing. That was seen by whoever it was that got him fired, I guess let's call it the Twitter mob, of being something that's just you're not able to say, as a white person, or just as a person in general, because we need to have solidarity, and to some people solidarity means conformity and concision and parroting whatever it is the talking points of the most loud and vocal group on quote unquote your team are saying at the given moment. And so for Daryl, when he went about his missionary work of deconverting hundreds of people from the cult of extreme bigotry, he did so by sitting down with them one at a time, befriending them, trying to understand the points that they were making, even though those points were most of the time terrible points that could be easily rebutted through just a little bit of digging. But he tried to hear what they had to say, because he recognized that they were not evil people who had a black core of death from Satan ingrained into their soul as an infant, that could never be saved, but they were rather people that were a product of their circumstances, just like we all are. And so, we're raised in extremely racist areas by even more racist parents a lot of the time. And so that's just the only thing that they ever grew up hearing. And, when there's nobody like Daryl, or there's no outside perspectives that come in to undermine the extremely incorrect points that they're told all the time, then of course they're gonna have those beliefs. It doesn't mean that they're bad people necessarily. It just means that they don't understand, that it's the other way. And so you recognize that it's the beliefs that are the problem, not the person. And those can be changed through dialogue. He would also recognize that a lot of times it was furthered by economic conditions, and so things like, the coal mine, laying off all of the white staff, or the traditional workers that had been working there in extremely harsh conditions for not that high of wages for a long time, but it's how they fed their families, and then the capitalist class deciding we can make even more money if we lay all these people off and replace them with immigrants, either legal or illegal. And because they'd work at a fraction of the price, not because they're bad people, but because they're trying to make a lives for themselves also. But then when the KKK comes in and says, hey, looky here, you are all laid off, living in squalor and poverty. You had these jobs for decades, and your job is still here, but you don't have it, and it's because that. And then they would insert a racial expletive to describe the person of color that was now working at the coal mine. That person has your job. And the people who aren't inherently racist would have a little bit of sympathy towards that point of view because it's a little bit true. And without a narrative that calls into question globalization and the nastier forms of capitalism and the greed and the monetary systems that lead to things like trade deals and those types of economics decisions that lead to that worker disenfranchisement, then the ground is fertile for racism. That's something that Daryl acknowledged as well. And so he went about that task of talking to these people by actually talking to them. Now, if it had been 30 years later and he had decided that instead of doing that over over decades, he wanted to start a hashtag that would get trending worldwide to call out the statements of these people and shame them into oblivion, and maybe get the social media companies to deplatform them so that they had no voice in the popular discourse. And then maybe if they had like a Klan rally, like we could get lots of people to show up like they did in Portland, at the Antifa thing, and they could throw milkshakes at the people. That might work. Or you could come with bullhorns and just shout them down and say, shut up racist, and then that, I think that if he had done that, he would have converted 0 people, and he probably would have reinforced the ideology that those people had, because it would have reinforced the stereotype of either black people or liberals or whatever the thing is that they'd been taught up to say, that these people are just gonna shout you down, and they're people that should be dismissed. The better way would be to undermine that idea by showing them some humanity. It's easy to dismiss people that have unenlightened views, or even views that are reprehensible, just out of hand, because why should I even engage with them? Plus, there is the instant gratification of the likes, of the positive comments, of the reinforcements of the bubbles which we sit in politically, of people saying that you're doing a good thing. If you're in popular culture, then as a celebrity, you might get interviewed on the late night shows or on the news, or have positive blogs written about you, or guest columns in the Huffington Post, or whatever it is. As being the person that is sitting on the moral high ground, condemning the yucky, racist, unenlightened turd people that are ruining America. It's a lot harder to come from a place of understanding and genuinely engage with those people in a way that actually fosters change, rather than further making them dig their heels in and reinforce those bigoted views that you're claiming to want to undermine. Not you, but the popular culture in general. And so I think that needs to be encouraged more, and I think we should all do what Daryl did a little bit more.